You make me so sick. I am going to bash you so hard. You...
In order to understand feudal socialism today, we must first understand what feudal socialism was in the past. In order to do so, we can go back to Marx's Communist Manifesto under the chapter Reactionary Socialism, where he details feudal socialism at his time. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocrats of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocrats again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interests, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in the ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half an echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect, though total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud and reverent laughter. One section of the French legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forgot that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism, and their chief accusation against the bourgeois amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat, as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in place of these, charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life in Mother Church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heartburnings of the aristocrat. What we can derive here is that the feudal socialist is always ready to spout his sinister prophecies of a coming catastrophe, such as the inevitable climate crisis, which can only be avoided if we curb our emissions. Even if a climate crisis is inevitable, wouldn't it be easier to deal with more resources and not less? Why does the salvation of the planet conveniently align with the constraint of the productive forces? Climate austerity today is the modern incarnation of feudal socialism. It is only the means by which the aristocracies around the world enclose the productive masses. There is also a religious element to feudal socialism. I think that today the most appropriate religion for feudal socialism is the New Age Mother Gaia religion, that reveres nature as sacred. They slaughter civilization on the altar of morality by subjugating the productive forces towards the aim of social morality. The feudal socialist also comes to the bourgeoisie with the issue that their rule creates a revolutionary proletariat. The issue for them is that capitalism disturbs social peace. Does this not perfectly describe the modern-day leftist, whose issues with the present system amount to cries about social peace and environmental devastation? The green leftist promises the working class with reforms and social programs, yet works against the interests of the working class by instituting policies that constrain the development of land and subjugate the productive forces to regulations and carbon taxing, making land and goods more expensive and inaccessible to the working class. The dream of the green leftist is to make the working class totally subservient on a neo-feudal state that encloses from them all the productive means of life. Feudal socialism is the twin brother of bourgeois socialism, and lives amongst its institutions at the highest levels. Was the Gilets Jaunes movement in France not an uprising against the feudal socialism of Macron? And is MAGA not above all a revolt against the feudal socialism of the Democrats, the World Economic Forum, the Green New Deal, and the Great Reset? Were the Canadian truckers not rebels against Trudeau's draconian health policies? And were the Dutch farmers not rebelling against the feudal socialism of the European Union, with their quotas on agricultural production? Populist movements against the reactionary environmental austerity measures of the present-day feudal socialists must be supported. Carbon pricing is one of the most notorious schemes of the feudal socialists, which aims to constrain the productive forces according to what is determined to be ideal emissions output. Oftentimes, these carbon pricing schemes are introduced without popular support and through the influence of NGOs. These carbon pricing schemes are peddled by conservatives such as the Fraser Institute here in Canada as a better alternative to regulation, and while this may be the case, carbon pricing policies are still reactionary. Carbon pricing causes the cost of living of the working class to increase, which in Canada is mitigated by a climate action incentive given when you file your taxes. What this amounts to is an enclosure on the proletariat, forcing them into the bosom of the state and constraining their development as a class. Economists promise an increase in GDP from carbon pricing, but none of the increase in GDP is real economic activity, but rather rent extracted by the state from the production process. Carbon pricing is therefore a reactionary policy that seeks to enclose the proletariat and weaken its independence, as well as imposing on civil society a carbon rent, constraining the productive forces. Therefore, communists and syndicalists ought to oppose carbon pricing entirely. Supply management is another scheme belonging to feudal socialism. It is also what the Dutch farmers had protested against. Supply management is a top-down regulatory approach to environmental issues that directly constrains the forces of production. In the Netherlands, the policy was intended to have the production of agricultural goods in the name of environmental austerity. Here in Canada, supply management was instituted to protect the interests of monopolies by capping the production of dairy and poultry goods, putting taxes on the rights to animals, and exorbitant taxes on dairy and poultry. The effect of this is that prices for dairy and poultry are kept artificially high. This increases the cost of living for the Canadian working class and renders small farmers uncompetitive to the big monopolies. Supply management is an example of feudal socialism because it requires an extensive state planning bureaucracy that is used towards constraining the productive forces and enclosing small farmers from the productive means of life. It is therefore necessary to free the Canadian working class from the yoke of supply management which encloses them by means of state planning and bureaucracy. Currently, the only party that opposes supply management at the present time is the People's Party of Canada. This is why I have said before that communists and syndicalists in Canada must join the People's Party of Canada in order to create a left-wing faction within the party. But ultimately, supply management should be the main point of unity between the left faction and the rest of the party. The enclosing of land from development around Canada's major metropolitan areas is a little discussed topic in Canadian politics. The affordable housing plan of the Liberals is inadequate to meet the demands for housing. The People's Party of Canada proposes limiting immigration, however the issue with this is that it does not solve the issue of foreign speculation in real estate. If we open up unused public land, which there is a lot of, for development, we could be able to significantly reduce the cost of housing. Here's William Kay talking about what he calls Eco-Fascism, or rather what I call Feudal Socialism, as well as its role in politics and landlordism, as well as the part that the environmentalist movement has played in closing land from Canadians.
What we still see is efforts by the landowning community to really restrict the supply of land. As they say, you can train a parrot to be an economist if the parrot can say supply and demand. So what they point out in the book, and which is obviously true, if we ever had a free market in land, landlordism would almost disappear. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. You know, the houses in Vancouver now, like a standard house now, is going for $1.5 million. A lot of those people bought those houses when they're worth a couple $100,000. If it isn't the physical house that's appreciating in value, they are in fact depreciating. They're getting older, they're rotting, what have you. It's the land that the house is sitting on is astronomically appreciating in value. Yet around Vancouver, there's all this green space that is not being allowed to develop because there's a political constituency that's preventing it from being developed. If you just opened up new fields of land, the actual just having the Caterpillar tractors go in there and the trench diggers, they just landscape it out flat, build the roads, build the trunk lines for the sewer system, etc. It's going to vary, but typically in Canada, the United States, think in terms of $10,000. If the land was public land, you didn't have to pay for that. You just sent in big construction crews just to landscape it all out. Roads, sewer system, electrical grid.
Right.
It comes to about $10,000 for a suburban lot. That's how much it costs to get that going. To actually put a house on that, cheaper all the time. You know, back when I was in university for one summer, I worked in this factory. We made prefab houses. We manufactured a house every 20 minutes. They're getting a lot better at that now. Like a lot of these houses, it's just tic-tac-toe. They're more or less assembled in factories and sent out there. So in terms of the actual cost of production of a suburban house, think in terms of $100,000, okay? Not $1.5 million.
Right.
If we really threw the land, the public lands open for development, if we eliminated a lot of this land use restrictions on land, you would see new houses going for $100,000, $150,000, you know, with a long-term low-interest mortgage. You're thinking in terms of, you know, monthly payments of $200 or $300. Nobody would be renting anymore. And it's also, it's a mistake to focus too much on residential rents, although it's an important part of the economy. In any modern society, certainly Canada, the United States, Europe, most business enterprises do not own the premises out of which they operate. They pay through the teeth for these premises. And it's not like, in Canada right now, it's about 60-40 in terms of housing. About 40% of the population are residential tenants. About 60% own their own houses.
Right.
That's a bit skewed too. Some of these European countries like Switzerland, 80% tenant. Germany, majority of the population, the residential population are tenants. The business premises, 99% of them are tenants. Like these bars, dental offices, they don't own the premises they live in.
Right.
If we really threw open land for development, there'd be a lot more office towers, a lot more warehouse space, a lot more stuff like this. A lot of companies would just buy outright their premises. So the authors of that, Who Owns the Earth, their argument, if we really had free enterprise in land, if we really let cities sprawl into the open fields, you would almost eliminate landlordism.
Right.
Landlordism only exists when they can really restrict the supply of land.
Right.
It's not a small part of it. You know, what we have now in Canada and across Europe and the States are all these green belts. They build these sort of, they declare these belts around all the major metropolitan areas as off limits to development. The one around Toronto Hamilton is 7,500 square kilometers. And it's right around the perimeters of those cities, and it's off limits for development.
The greatest element of feudal socialism is the enclosing of public land from development, and is aided in part by the environmental movement. The Green movement in Canada presents itself as a radical social movement. However, in reality, it completely serves the interests of land monopolies by advocating for the enclosure of public land. Communism contains the abolition of the distinction between town and country. Therefore, a coalition between communists and libertarians is necessary to challenge the landed interest in both Canada and the United States. Opening up public land for development should be the first stage of communist and syndicalist land reform, and should pave the way for a parceling out of the bourgeois socialist holding system. Marx said, in his criticism of Henry George, that the class struggle was at its most intense when land in the West was freely available. Therefore, developing public land will accelerate the class struggle, leading to greater social change in the future. Ultimately, however, defeating the landed interests of monopolies that benefit from the scarce supply of land will be a blow to the bourgeois socialist system and will increase the political economy of the productive classes. Ultimately, the class struggle today is increasingly becoming a struggle within hired labor, as the owning classes have become passive and existing within the confines of state regulation and planning. The class struggle today is the polarization between free contracted labor and bureaucratic management. The production system today is less organized by the helmsmanship of the capitalist, but rather by the cameral bureaucracy of the bourgeois socialist holding system. The objective of syndicalism today is to organize a new syndical cameral structure in production that minimizes bureaucracy and unproductive labor as much as possible. Syndicalism today should also work towards the alliance of unionized workers and free contracted labor as well as owner-operators. A future social revolution, therefore, entails a lockout of the unproductive bureaucratic class. In conclusion, we must work against the green movement, which constrains the development of land and the productive forces and finds their alliance within the landed interests as well as monopolist bureaucratic management. The landed interests in the bourgeois socialist magistrate of monopoly cartels are classes bound up with feudal socialism and work to constrain from us the productive means of life through policies such as carbon taxing, supply management, and the conservation of land. The true ideology of the green movement is feudal socialism, and it must be combated every step of the way. Environmentalism is but the holy water that the New Age shamans consecrate the heart-burnings of the aristocrat. It is completely contrary to the interests of the productive classes. The climate crisis is merely a ghastly tale that our civil servants use to scare us into submission. If the climate crisis is coming, then it is inevitable, and climate austerity is merely a hindrance to our ability to mitigate its effects. We must stand for the development of the productive forces and the availability of land and freedom from the dominion of the landlords.